The reigning Formula One champion Max Verstappen has literally ripped into the behavior of some of his masked orange army of very devoted fans. And this happened on Saturday, right after flares were thrown on track during qualifying for his home Dutch Grand Prix. It seemed like he had a lot to say as he blasted stupid fans. But was that the only thing that got him riled up? Let's find out. First off, the world champion was absolutely pissed. Now, the Runway Series leader even claimed his second consecutive pole at his home event right after a red-flagged interruption. When we saw one flare thrown had landed on the circuit, and the red flag was waved right at the start of Q2, which kinda delayed the action for at least 6 minutes, as everyone rushed to extinguish the flare. It didn't take a lot of brain and time to figure out who was responsible for such an act, but when found, the person was immediately ejected from the circuit. Plus, it was a day when other flares were definitely seen but attracted less attention. So, especially after the race organizers had already announced that flares weren't allowed, the media demanded a response from Verstappen. And boy, oh boy, was he critical about it. In fact, he didn't even hesitate to say it was a pretty silly thing to do. Adding to that, he said, "It's stupid. So please just don't do that. You get thrown out and it ruins the racing." Now, the circuit was a sea of orange-clad Verstappen supporters going crazy on Saturday, cheering for the F1 champion. Clearly, there were a bunch of flares going off despite the warnings from the organizers. In fact, notices went throughout the circuit, warning that if anyone was found with lighting flares, they'd be removed immediately by the security staff. And if that wasn't enough, pigeons even caused problems on the track for some of the drivers. What's more, even his rivals shared his anger and concern. Now, Verstappen was definitely considerate about the fans' love and spirit. But while holding flares is all nice and sweet, there's definitely a limit to how much, especially on a racetrack where the F1 drivers risk their lives every day. They get into the car and race at the highest speeds you can imagine. Clearly, throwing it on the track was nothing more than stupid, at least for Max. And while the person got removed, he still felt it wasn't a good experience for anyone, because it's just easier to be excited and stay safe rather than crossing limits and having to leave the circuit. Having said that, the session is stopped. You can't see the race, and on top of that, it's super dangerous. So why do it? And his comments were soon echoed by his nearest rivals, Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, the Ferrari duo. In fact, Leclerc added that it's pretty dangerous, and if a car is passing at full speed, when the flare is thrown on the track, it creates some unnecessary risks. Adding to that, Sainz said it's very important to educate the fans and let them know when it's possible to use the flares and when it's not. Coming up, after a warning, an angry Verstappen reflects on a strong qualifying session at the Dutch GP. Now, Sainz believes it was good that they used them on the in-lap when Max took pole rather than right in the middle of the race or lap 1, because that's the time they're in the middle of some pretty intense fights. And with cars moving at 300 kilometers an hour, you really don't want all the distractions coming in from the smoke. Having said that, it comes down to the organization, who needs to do a better job in warning when it's a good time to use flares and when it's not, and obviously also making sure no one does the stupidity of throwing it on track. Hopefully, next time onwards, that won't be a huge issue. Anyway, it was definitely a great race for Verstappen, who went on to take pole position, and to the delight of a pretty exciting mass of home supporters in a packed crowd. At the Zandvoort Seaside Circuit, the 24-year-old Dutchman even pulled out the fastest lap to top the times. Honestly, it came 24 hours after a very difficult opening day for the world champion, who was even halted by a gearbox failure in the first practice session. Having said that, Max found the fans' behavior surprising and unbelievable, as he criticized elements of his fanbase who dared to bring flares into the circuit despite the multiple warnings, and especially after the day before, which was pretty difficult. But that didn't stop the team from completely turning it around and giving their best at the race. Following up, the F1 drivers and their teams for the 2022 Dutch GP starting grid. Now, Well, the race kept all spirits at an all-time high. In fact, Verstappen added that it was pretty close, and the pole lap was absolutely insane. And while it was a bit rushed in FP2 to get the car together, it was still enjoyable to drive in Zandvoort. Alright, so we've got 20 of them lined up, starting from the F1 champion Max Verstappen driving for Red Bull, followed by Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, the duo representing Ferrari. And of course, the grid isn't really complete without the 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton for Mercedes, along with his teammate George Russell. And while this may be a deciding time, as Mick Schumacher decides to leave the Ferrari driving academy, he's here representing Haas. All your favorites are ready to race, from Daniel Ricciardo, Sebastian Vettel, and Pierre Gasly, to Alex Albon, Nicholas Latifi, and Fernando Alonso. And there's a bunch of controversies surrounding all the players we've mentioned. In fact, everyone's curious, with so many questions as contracts are ending. We've definitely got the rumors about which F1 driver's gonna end up in which team, but it looks like we still gotta wait until the end to know for sure. Not to mention, Max won the Dutch Grand Prix for his 4th win in a row. Max moved one step closer to his 2nd consecutive world title after outlasting his competition to win the Dutch Grand Prix at his home circuit. And while Lewis Hamilton is in the perfect position for his first win of the season, Verstappen used a safety car and absolutely nailed the restart to easily overtake the 7-time world champion in Abu Dhabi last year. Following the Dutchman was George Russell, who changed tires for a final push, which resulted in him taking 2nd place, while Charles Leclerc managed to just pass Hamilton and finish it off for 3rd place on the podium. Max's win at his home race even catapulted him 109 points ahead of Charles Leclerc, and it's pretty clear that he's a driver who's full of confidence, not just in himself and his abilities, but also in his team and cars. In fact, one of Mercedes' strategy calls that were debated involved the decision to pit Russell under the safety car, but not Hamilton. That was supposed to allow Max to easily overtake him for the lead, which he absolutely did. While some may believe that leaving Russell out as a buffer would have been the right decision for Mercedes, Max was pretty adamant, saying he would have secured victory even with the added pressure of passing the Mercedes driver. Clearly, it's been nothing short of an incredible weekend for Max, with a lot of twists and turns for the F1 drivers. Finally, Lewis Hamilton desperate to fight Verstappen. Right after leading the Dutch Grand Prix, Hamilton finished the race in 4th, and Max took the victory all for himself. At the same time, the 7-time world champion is pretty confident that Mercedes is going to be able to secure a race victory this season. And with that spirit, he's ready to challenge Red Bull once again. In fact, he's dying to have the opportunity to race the Dutchman, as he remains confident for a win. Having said that, you gotta agree that Hamilton definitely came the closest he has to victory this year at the Dutch Grand Prix, right before a combination of strategy risks and safety cars saw him drop to 4th, with Verstappen taking the lead. And after the 2021 season centered on fighting the Red Bull team, with all the controversy with Michael Masi in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix last year, Hamilton is desperate to get Mercedes back in the mix and can't wait to take down his old rival once again. The fire inside the F1 drivers never dies, now does it? Moving on, he said there were quite a couple of great things to take from the Dutch Grand Prix, and if this ends up being consistent for the future races, the F1 drivers are gonna continue breathing down their necks, with Mercedes even taking the win. At least according to Hamilton, the 7-time world champion is pretty confident and ready to take the positives out of each race and move forward. The goal is not to give up. That's a wrap for this video. What's your take on the F1 champion's anger towards stupid fans at the Dutch Grand Prix? Do you think it was justified or a little too much? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.